Now to our interview with the guest of the day. I am joined by the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Dr. Muda Yusuf, for discussion on the decision of the federal government to halt subsidy removal and target non-oil revenue. Dr. Yusuf is also the former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, it was just about 2 weeks ago when we had fuel subsidy was one of the 3 major issues we discussed on this program, where you enumerated the challenges ahead of the incoming administration. But it appears the more we talk about fuel subsidy removal, the less we do. What makes it more delicate or so delicate to deal with?
Well, by its very nature and the fact that it has far-reaching implications, especially for the ordinary Nigerians. Also, when you situate it within the context of the prevailing poverty conditions and the sensibility of Nigerians generally, it makes the issue of fuel subsidy a very touchy one. It makes it an emotive matter, even though there are very sound economic arguments to support it, to ensure economic sustainability. But again, one needs to be sensitive, to these other issues, the social dimension of the issues, and also the political dimension. Because tough decisions often come with high political costs, most times. Although, as they say, leadership is not about popular decisions. Leadership is not a popularity contest. It's just like if somebody has an ailment and you want to be healed, you need therapy. The process of therapy is not often a very pleasant one. But at the end of the day, the patient smiles if it gets healed eventually. So that is what it is. So because of the nature of it, it requires very wide consultation. It requires consensus building. And sometimes it is difficult to build, some of those consensus. And again, over time, we have not actually put in place some key enablers, that will ensure that we get this subsidy thing behind us. That is one. Secondly, there are also issues of trust deficit. If the citizens feel that those calling on them to make sacrifices are not demonstrating the spirit of sacrifice, they feel that, why must we sacrifice when those our leaders are not showing example? So for a whole lot of reasons, it has been a very difficult issue to deal with. But gradually, I think we are building some consensus around it, especially because now the economy is in dire straits. The economy is, we're almost in a state of insolvency. What insolvency means is your ability to easily meet your obligations. Because if you look at the data, even the recent data from the World Bank is saying that almost 90% of our revenue will go into debt service. I know the kind of pressure that is bringing on economic management as a whole. Apart from that, there is also the challenge of, you have to sustain the economy. Otherwise, you keep going around in circle. You have seen some of the recent ratings by international rating agencies. The ratings that they have given Nigeria is not very pleasant at all. We have been classified as very high risk, credit risk economy. And the implication of that is that if you want to raise capital now, either as a sovereign, as a country, or as a corporate, internationally, it's going to be extremely difficult. And if you are going to even get the capital at all, it's going to be very, very expensive, because they are going to factor in what we call risk premium, because you have been classified or categorized as a highly risky country, at least from the point of view of credit rating. You know, these things are not these are not good indications. They are not good signs for any economy. So, and we have a challenge, especially now that we are transiting into a new administration. There's a very big challenge to put the economy on a very strong footing. And some, difficult decisions will have to be made. Because at the end of the day, if you don't do those things, if you don't take those decisions. The economy may, I don't want to use the word collapse, but things may get really very bad.
All right. Now that a decision has been made, how do you think it will affect the economy?
Now, let me make this point before we go ahead. I've heard people say that the government has decided to suspend the subsidy removal. I listened to the statement by the finance minister. She didn't quite say that government was suspending subsidy removal. What she said was that subsidy removal will not take place before the transition.
Absolutely.
It's going to be after the transition. And after the transition, the new government will now decide whether it wants to remove it or not, whether it wants to reschedule, whether it wants to face it. In other words, the new government will come with a framework for the removal, including the necessary engagements, including the necessary, policies to cushion the likely effects of the removal. Because for one thing, there is a legislative angle to the issue of subsidy now. Because the Petroleum Industry Act, as amended, allowed for subsidy only up till June. So the PIA is an act of the National Assembly. So it's a law. So nobody can unilaterally now sit down and say that I'm suspending the subsidy outside what has been agreed. The second legislative issue is what the minister also said, is that the decision to move it up till the removal up till June was backed by a supplementary budget. So for anybody to shift it beyond that, there has to be a supplementary budget, which has to be submitted to the National Assembly and approved. So these are some critical legislative issues that needs to be dealt with. So it is not possible for either the National Economic Council or the Minister of Finance to just announce that it has been suspended. And in any case, that was not what she said. What she said was that the removal will take place after the transition, and the new government will determine the modalities and the framework and the strategies for removal of the subsidy. So I think we need to make that very clear. Now, you are talking about the impact on the ordinary.
How does it affect the economy?
Now, the subsidy issue has a number of effects on the economy. Some positive, some negative. First is the revenue effect. Now we are spending, our estimate now is about 7 trillion naira annually. Because half year we are talking about 3.5 or 3.7 trillion. So if by the removal of the subsidy, we're able to make that savings, and if these resources are utilized properly, and don't forget, this savings is not only savings that will go to the purse of the federal government. It's a savings that will allow more revenues to accrue to the federation account. And when you have more revenues in the federation account, it benefits all tiers of government: the federal, the states, and the local governments. And we all know the financial condition of many of these state governments and local governments. Many of them are struggling to even pay salaries. Even as we speak, many of them are owing arrears of salaries. Many of them have not been able to pay even the minimum wage. They are struggling with the provision of facilities for their citizens, provision of water, provision of rural roads, provision of health facilities, provisions of education, and all of that. And these are very crucial things that a government needs to provide to ease the burden on the citizens and to even, mitigate the current level of poverty. But the governments, they need these resources. So we have to make a choice. Do you want to use these resources to continue to provide the subsidy? Or you want to make it available to all tiers of government to be able to provide better service to the citizens? That is very important. Secondly, there's an investment effect. Because when we talk about subsidy removal, people think immediately about the fact that oil price is going to, fuel price will go up, blah, blah, blah. But more importantly, is the implication for investment. Because no economy thrives without investment. It is investment that drives the growth of any economy. It is investment that will lead to job creation. It is job creation that will lead to lasting reduction in poverty. So we need to recognize that nexus. Now, we have a very strategic sector, which ordinarily should be a very big asset to this country. I'm talking of the oil and gas sector. Unfortunately, and very unfortunately, it has become a liability to the country. And why did that happen? It has happened because the policy issues around the sector is not encouraging, it's not attracting investors into the sector. And when I mean investors, I mean private investors, both domestic and foreign investors. All the major players in the oil and gas sectors, many of them have divested. And for a very long time, many of them were not operating even in the downstream sector. Downstream is where you have refineries, pipelines, marketing, and so on. They have since left that space. And how do you have such a strategic sector and you are not able to pull investors into that space?
All right, Dr. Yusuf,
and look at how much money other countries are making from oil and gas investments.
Dr. Yusuf, before we get into these core issues,
yes.
Now you've talked about trust deficits, poverty, the good and bad connected to this issue.
Yes.
Over 100 million Nigerians living in poverty. How does an average Nigerian internalize this issue?
Well, that is why we need to engage properly. And that is why we need to play down on sentiments and emotions. Because we are looking at something that will ensure an enduring improvement in the lives of the average citizens. When people talk about prices will go up, and of course I resonate with that. I agree with them. But we need to think medium term. We need to think long term. We are where we are today, where we are spending close to $15 billion to be importing petroleum products into the country, just because of the dysfunctional policies in the oil and gas sector. That is not a good story to tell. What are we going to tell incoming generations? That you had this massive natural resource that other countries are using to build fantastic economies, to build their infrastructure, to build their industries, and yet you don't have anything to show for it. So we need to ensure that we enlighten the citizens to know that this is for this is in the best interest of not only the current generation, but also future generation. And I talked about the impact additional revenue will have. There are also the employment effects. If we're able to unlock investment in this sector, we should be looking at annually close to $5 billion to $10 billion US dollars of investment in that space. And when you have investment, you have economic growth. When you have economic growth, everybody benefits. Of course, the government has to ensure that we have a growth that is inclusive. Because you could have a growth that is not inclusive. And the whole essence of an inclusive growth is to ensure that everybody benefits.
All right.
From the process of the growth. So there's a whole lot that can happen. We are going to have savings. Our foreign reserve is going to improve significantly. Because imagine you are not spending $15 billion annually to be importing petroleum products. Imagine the impact of that on our foreign reserves. Imagine the impact of that on our exchange rate.
All right, so ultimately, fuel subsidy removal is good for us, but must be phased, isn't it?
Of course, it is very good. But we need to convince people, and we need to be able to also deliver the message properly. And we also need to appeal to our elites. Because sometimes people say things that sometimes could mislead the generality of the citizens. We cannot continue this way. We cannot continue.
All right.
We have 4 refineries. None have worked for close to 10 years. We can't continue this way. And the only way to make these things work is to decouple it from the government. Government cannot run it. That is the central message.
Private investors?
Yes. Private investors. Look at what is happening with Nigeria LNG. If Nigeria LNG was under NNPC, do you think they'll be thriving the way they are thriving? Look at the billions of dollars they are declaring as dividends to government. Government is a shareholder in it. So the government can be a shareholder in this, but the minority shareholder.
All right. So, Dr. Yusuf, a new administration is due in May, and many analysts are saying this decision is sort of a trap for the incoming administration.
No, that is not correct. Even the incoming administration had laid it out clearly in its manifesto that subsidy will be removed. The details and the framework for the removal, of course, was not stated in the manifesto. That's not a manifesto issue. But it is a cardinal point of the incoming administration. It's clearly stated in the manifesto. That is one. Secondly, right from the beginning of the year, it has been stated that that the subsidy provision that we have will be up until June 2023. Everybody knows that. And there was also an amendment to the Petroleum Industry Act. Because ideally, if the act was not amended, the removal of subsidy could have been effective from January. Because it's already a law. But it was amended so that we can push it forward to June. So the minister and the NEC have not said anything new. They have not said anything new. These are things that we already know. These are things that the incoming administration also already stated in its manifesto.
But government talks about wrong timing. When will the timing be ideal?
Well, that is debatable. Because there's no perfect timing for things like this. Decisions have to be taken. But it has to be taken strategically. And that is why when we talk about this issue of subsidy, we should not talk about it in isolation. We should be talking about enablers for the subsidy removal. One of the enablers is to ensure that we have competition in that space, starting even with the importation, because you can't fix the refineries overnight. What we are dealing with now is a monopoly situation. NNPC is the sole importer of petroleum products. That is why diesel is as expensive as it is. That is why aviation fuel is as expensive as it is. Because no matter what you say, once you have a monopoly situation, you have set up the people for exploitation. No matter how well-meaning the leadership may be. And the best way in economic management to protect the citizens is to ensure competition. Once there is competition, the opportunities for exploitation and ripping up of people will be drastically reduced. That is absent in the current framework. So the first thing that should happen under the new administration is to ensure that there's competition.
Okay.
Only NNPC cannot be importing petroleum products. We can have as many as 20 of them. If they all have access to foreign exchange at whatever rate it is, and they have access to imports, of course, subject to quality standards, we are not likely to see this kind of exploitation that is taking place. That is one. Secondly, we need to liberalize investment in refineries. Whatever it will take to incentivize investors in refineries, we have to put it on the table, and we have to be very generous about it. Because there are quite a number of people who are interested in investing in refineries. We have so many licenses that people have been carrying around. But they cannot activate investment because the policy is not conducive for the investment. You cannot take a private capital, invest in a project, and government will be dictating the price at which you sell your product. It's not done anywhere. Because it's not a social product. So we need to ensure that we create environment for more investors in refineries, private investors. And the current refineries we have needs to be privatized. It may not be completely. Government can still hold some minority share, but government should not be the one appointing MDs, dictating procurement. And if you continue with that model, there's no way we can get out of this crisis.